Taoiseach, I'm extremely concerned about the new proposed residential zoned land tax. I should say at the outset that I'm in favour of a site vacancy tax that encourages developers or those who are sitting on residentially zoned land to engage in the process of development. I have reviewed the revenue guidance on the tax in the last week, and in short, Taoiseach, I was shocked. This tax is now a revenue-raising measure, as opposed to a tax that is designed to encourage stakeholders to develop land. We have a plethora of reports in recent months indicating that viability is now the key issue in housing. Commencements of developments continue to fall as a result of unviable permissions. Development plans have been adopted outside of Dublin, and they continue to force developers to apply for permissions that are not viable. The planning regulator has advised the Minister on a number of locations to rezone lands to high density, rendering them unviable. Your Minister has adopted these changes, knowing the effect of same will render the zoned lands undevelopable. If you don't believe me, you might check with your own councillor, Anthony Barry in Carricktool. Willing developers that are trying their best to develop lands are delayed for years with the dead hand of government. And what I mean by that, Taoiseach, is the dysfunctional planning departments in a lot of county councils that are understaffed, the basket case that is on board Penola, and the crazy zoning and house calculation targets set by the planning regulator. The planning process can take up to 5 years from the date of zoning, and that's assuming that the lands are serviced. It can take up to 8 months to get a pre-planning meeting in Wexford. That's at the moment, and I'm sure it's the same with other local authorities. A year to design a scheme, a year to get a decision, a further year and possibly more to get the board if they were functioning, and a year to get through judicial review. And during all that process, you will have collected 5 years land tax before development can be commenced. Any such tax as this should provide reliefs for all of the above circumstances. Your tax does not. There should be a viability relief provision in the tax. And the Exchequer already takes 52% of every new house. You now propose to add possibly up to 15% more to that figure by way of applying this new residential development land tax. Now, you've also brought in a pyrite levy. Young people are at their wits' end trying to buy houses. How can they ever expect to afford a home when government keep applying taxes that are simply going to be passed on to the poor, misfortunate first-time buyers? This is the death nail in the coffin of housing if this proceeds.
Thanks very much, Deputy. Just in relation to the residential zone land tax, it will raise revenue, and any tax does raise revenue, but that's not the primary purpose of the tax. The primary purpose of the tax is to make sure that where land is zoned for housing, that it actually gets developed for housing. And we're all aware of the need for additional housing in the state, and the fact that a lot of land that is zoned for housing is not being developed, and that's the whole purpose and the whole thinking behind the tax. It is a response to the very deep and very severe housing crisis that our citizens face. I might be wrong with this, and I will check up on it. My understanding is that the tax doesn't apply if reasonable efforts are being made to develop the land. It's not that you have to build a house or apartments on the land tomorrow, but it is that you have to enter the process of applying for planning permission and etc. But I'll double check on that. And I agree it wouldn't be fair to impose a tax on somebody who was actually making reasonable efforts to develop the land for housing. And secondly, it is worth pointing out that that the land owner can request that the land be dezoned. We do accept that people have private property rights. That land might be in a family for generations and they may not want to develop it, and it is possible under legislation for someone who doesn't want the land to be developed to request that it be dezoned, and that then allows us to zone land elsewhere that can then be developed for housing. Finally, just in relation to your comments on planning departments, very much agree that we need to make sure that our planning departments are properly resourced, and the same goes for Bord Penal as well. We'll build about 28,000 new homes in Ireland this year, more than any year in more than a decade, but we need to be much higher than that. We need to be well over 30,000 next year, and part of that is making sure that those planning departments are properly resourced.
I listened to your response, and I know, you yourself are a great supporter of the US Republicans, and just listening to you, what comes to mind is what Ronald Reagan had to say when he described the 9 most terrifying words in the English language, and they are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." I have to say, there is nothing that the government has done to help. Looking at any help that you've tried to give first-time buyers, every time you put your hand to the housing, it just gets worse and worse. And Taoiseach, something has got to give.
Thanks, Deputy. Just for the record, I'm not a supporter of any political party in the United States, but I will check with Minister Donoghue on that issue in relation to reliefs, because this is the tax that I do agree with. I think land that is owned for housing should be developed for housing. The people shouldn't hang on to it. If they want to dezone, that's fair enough, but if it is owned for housing, it should be developed for housing. But I don't agree it should apply if somebody is making reasonable efforts, applies for planning permission, etc. And I'll definitely follow that up with Mr Donoghue.